We've got a full house for our 2016 Justice Summit. I'm Public Defender Jeff Adachi, and I'll be your MC and host for the summit. San Francisco is at a crossroads. In the last 6 months, we've had 3 police shootings, all of people of color. In December, Mario Woods was surrounded by 11 police officers and was shot to death. He was said to be holding a knife. 4 months later, another man by the name of Luis Gongora was shot down by police within seconds of their arrival. And just last week, a 29-year-old African-American woman named Jessica Williams was shot to death. She was in a car, said to be in a stolen car, trying to get away from the police. These are not isolated incidents. The killings of Alex Nieto, Amilcar, Perez-Lopez, and many others mirror the killings of Michael Brown, Oscar Grant, Tamir Rice, Eric Gardner, Laquan McDonald, and so many others around the country.
Say that, Jeff.
For the past 6 months, San Francisco's Police Commission has been debating how to change the city's antiquated use of force rules for police officers. Currently, police officers are allowed to use whatever force they deem necessary, a term that's known as reasonable force. The proposed policy would instead require minimal force. The debate is over how to make San Francisco safe. One of the big issues has been the question of tasers. Opponents say that tasers kill, and proponents of tasers say that they save lives. So in today's summit, we're going to focus on the issue of the use of force and talk about how we can do better as a city. I'm so proud that we have one of the most amazing and accomplished people in our time here today, Melissa Harris Perry. She's a hero of mine and a leading light for justice. She's a change maker and a fearless pioneer.
Yes, she is.
Through her political commentary, her teaching, her writing, her research, and expert presentations, she has done so much to influence this country and the movement known as Black Lives Matters. She'll give our keynote address in just a few minutes. Before we begin, I want to thank our sponsors who made this event possible. I'd like to thank the law firm of Morgan Lewis, Joan Hartani, and Michelle Liu, Craig Peters from the Veen firm, Doug Young of Farrell, LeBron, and Martel. Thank you very much for your generous support. I also want to acknowledge the Bar Association of San Francisco, who co-sponsored the event with us. I want to thank all of our volunteers, Tamara Apperton, Larry Roberts, Joan Kukowitz, Kathy Asada, Angela Aoyong, and the many other volunteers that work to make this event possible. I'd also like to dedicate this year's summit to the memory of 2 lawyers that we lost over this past year. Marla Zamora, who worked in the Public Defender's Office for almost 30 years, and Garrick Liu, a veteran criminal defense attorney. They mentored many of us here, including myself, and we will honor their legacy by fighting daily for justice and due process. Now, to kick off today's summit, I am excited to introduce one of our city's most talented musicians, Marcus Shelby. Marcus is an extraordinary musician, bassist, and composer who's performed for over 25 years. A graduate of Cal Arts, he is the director of the Marcus Shelby Orchestra, and in the tradition of John Coltrane, Nina Simone, and Gil Scott-Heron, he has used his talent and his music to further social change. His most recent composition, Beyond the Blues, focuses on the prison industrial complex. He has won many, many awards. He's performed with Adachi and written scores for Anna DeVoe Smith's plays, Tom Waits, and many others. He's been teaching for many years, but one thing you may not know is that Marcus spends his weekends in the juvenile hall, where he takes his bass and he teaches young people the value of music and the arts. Performing with Marcus is Jackie Ramos, a poet and also a writing teacher of youth at Juvenile Hall. Let's give them a warm welcome.
How's everybody doing today?
Bass doesn't usually have to get up this early in the morning. So,
Especially for artists, right?
I'm just talking about my bass. We're very honored to be here. As Jeff said, Jackie and I have been working for the last, well, really for me it's been 3 years. Over the last 2 years, we've been going into the Juvenile Justice Center, working with the young people there. And it's been an ongoing thing for the last 3 years. Mainly just to kind of go in, take musicians in. We bring in friends of ours in the community who do different things. Maybe they play music, maybe they do other things in life. But we try to put these young people in contact with people who are passionate about what they do in life, so that they see other options that exist, perhaps outside of their community. That's been wonderful. And also monthly we have a meeting at the Red Poppy Art House where we discuss the prison industrial complex, where we discuss the school to prison pipeline, where we discuss issues around public health. And we're very fortunate to have the public defender in the city that we do. And Jeff came to our meeting 2 months ago and gave a very beautiful presentation and showed his film. And so we're happy that artists, public officials, teachers, lawyers, doctors are coming together to really try to deal with this issue not only locally, but also nationally. And we know we have an issue to deal with here. And so as an artist, as a musician, and as a father of 2 young girls in this city, it's important that that we become part of a very creative and soulful solution. So part of what we do is just, we do the blues. I love the blues. The blues is the foundation of all of American music. It came out of the minds and hearts of African Americans who were enslaved here. They used a very creative, soulful force to get out of slavery, using the blues. The blues shouts, work songs, fill cries, blues hollers, spirituals. And it was just this way of communicating that people like Harriet Tubman was able to get creative ideas of how to get away from slavery. And that has been a part of our music: improvisation, inflection. And Jackie is someone who I met through one of our meetings that we had, the Red Poppy, once again called Beyond the Blues. And she's a wonderful writer, and she's been working with the young folks over there. I think one of her young students is here. And so we're just going to do something that we do when we go into juvenile hall and other places when we perform. What's your poem called?
My poem is called We Remember. But before I start, I just wanted to give a brief intro. Thank you to Jeff Adachi for setting this up, this opportunity. And thank you, all of you, for just allowing us to share this space. We appreciate you. This poem was written for the kings and queens I work with at Juvenile Hall and at the Young Women's Freedom Center, and really all incarcerated youth and youth at large who've been impacted by pain, trauma, loss, and abuse. I see you. This is for you. It's called We Remember. I'm afraid to call this city my home. He writes behind confines of a concrete jungle, a system he learned to navigate at the age of 12 as he steps on a plastic-hardened bunk he calls bed, gazes in the narrow view of a glass-lit window. His only connection to the outside world is dim. He remembers practicing left-hand layups on an empty court, unmarked car surveys the background. He waits. Coldness stole the beauty of that night. A loud pop. Beat drums of adolescent ears, crimson rivers flow as the sky swallows view. And the soul wrestles with body in a desperate attempt to evade the tunnel's light. But poison-laced lead is a hell that drowns dreams, and last looks become regrets. A final exhale is your goodbye. All he could think of is revenge. All his brother whispers, don't let my fall be your demise. He remembers the day that changed his life, the moment that stole his heart, the time he lived but died. He remembers. The school system failed me. She smiles while eyes weigh heavy, placing butter on a warm toast. Across a table where exaggerated laughs mask worry and sleeves conceal pathways of hidden scars. Each cut numbed the pain of abuse. Every attack that bruised her gentle, precious heart. Where he touched what belonged to her. Where bullies martyred her sacred name. Where a lover's first kiss met the swing of a blow. She remembers. Walking on schoolyards, seeking refuge in the arms of the teacher. Courage knocked the door that day, but like the others, again is turned away. Funneled through a pipeline, they throw salt on open wounds. She sits alone in an isolated cell that feels more like an empty tomb. And unseen tears watch the sanctity of the womb. She remembers the day that changed her life, the moment that stole her heart, the time she lived but died. She remembers. The police are enemies, not our protectors. Lines flood a vibrant block, and funerals overbook schedules, birthday wishes and graduation gowns are stolen. By caskets, another child is laid to rest. Another mother is broken from the picture that lays in her chest. And in crowds of people, she is forever alone. carrying the what ifs that stole her child from their home. They remember. Rich in melatonin, royalty paints the beauty of skin, becomes a mark of envy from the coward left within. They hide behind badges, crusade on bullet castings, target practice on our babies' bodies, for they fear the vigor of our fate. Planted evidence that outweighs the scale of justice that locked Papa 22 years to life away. They remember the day that changed their lives, the moment that stole their hearts, the time they lived but died. They remember. You look at me as if I'm special. I survey the room and see resilience in their heart, beauty in their soul, wisdom that follows their voice. A young man, a young woman, carrying the spirit of a child, stolen that day, the moment that broke their heart. A fortress now hides the light in dark. We remember. I tell them, a higher calling brought me to you. I walk in relentless love because I see your truth. Actions marry words, strengthen a circle of trust. Slowly, piece by piece, steel walls crumble, and one by one, links to mental chains fall off. I say, write about your pain, sing your truth, dance in your vastness. Now a reflection in a mirror of a king, of a queen, greets them, and scars heal as wounds transform, and borders of fear become bridges of hope. They bathe in their purpose, while 1,000 chariots bless their names, and dreams touch this lifetime, rejoicing in a new day. We remember the day that changed their lives, the moment that restored their hearts. We remember. Thank you. Thank you. And before we leave, I just wanted to read the names of the youth that I work with. You have blessed my life more than you know, and I am forever humbled in your greatness. Byron, Sachi, Reese, Khalid, Kali, Daryl, Devon, Dewan, Eduardo, Winston, Duwop, Ray Rizzle, Thurman, Floss, Jazzy, Kiora, Jay, Jessie, Jess, Paola, Mel, Dafalia, Candy, Lucy, Julia, Juju. I love y'all. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus and Jackie. Wasn't that an amazing performance? Later you'll hear a song composed by the youth who benefit from Marcus and Jackie's work at Juvenile Hall. Our keynote speaker, Melissa Harris Perry, is an author, a television host, and professor. She has a PhD in political science and is a professor at Wake Forest University in North Carolina. She's an author and an editor at large with Elle Magazine. From 2012 until 2016, she hosted one of the most significant, influential, provocative, and entertaining news and commentary programs this country has ever seen. And it's true. Her show in 2012 experienced more growth than all of the cable networks together and was the #1 slot for young people, 18 to 34. Going boldly where no show had gone before, Melissa Harris Perry tackled issues like mass incarceration, racism, Black Lives Matters, criminal justice reform, police brutality, and so many other critical issues that are typically overlooked or ignored by mainstream media. And she made these issues mainstream media. Saturday usually is my one day to rest, but I would never miss one of her programs. It was really an amazing show. And I remember one particular show where she read the names of all the men and boys and women and girls across the country who had been victims of police shootings. And her show was the only show that did that, and I'm sure she got a lot of grief for that. It's not necessarily hard to be a person of color on TV. What is hard is to be a genuine person of color and speak the truth. And the one thing that Melissa has always done is to be genuine with the audience, with the people who watch her show, with Americans, and with people who don't have a voice. And that's why we as public defenders relate so much to what she has done and what she has achieved through all the work that she's done. Now she's of course very, very, very much in demand. I saw her on Jeopardy last week. You were great. So you might wonder, how is it that we were able to get her here? And it just so happens that her sister, Elizabeth Hilton, is a deputy public defender in our office. So we had an inside track. But we thank her so much for being here. So let's give a warm San Francisco welcome to Melissa Harris Perry.
Thank you so much. It was an extremely kind introduction, and it is true, of course, that to the extent that that we achieved much of anything on the question of social justice, it really has much less to do with me and much more to do with the fact that I am married to a housing advocate and the little sister of a public defender, and therefore held accountable in my household, right? And so, in part, I've regularly felt as though I had this extraordinary platform, this kind of public platform, to speak about these issues. But the reality is that the work, I have a clear sense of where the work is actually happening. So I have far too many slides and not enough time. So I want to just start. And I will say, Jeff, I did not know that we were starting in this particular way, but I think you will find ultimately that the slides I prepared today end up mirroring much of what is happening in the film that you began us with. And then, Marcus, also with the work it turns out that you're doing. Just want to make this claim, that we are existing in this moment where our politics are simply engaged with a movement that is based in a claim that Black Lives Matter. And I want to make an argument that Black Lives Matter is both a declaration and it's a set of questions, right? So it's both Black Lives Matter, period, but then also a question, do Black Lives matter? Right? And then also, if Black Lives matter, what would be different? How might the world look different if Black Lives mattered? And I'm going to do kind of the professorial thing. All I'm going to do for our talk is I'm going to walk us through the definitions of Black Lives and Matter to see if we get to a place where we can then be in conversation with one another about whether or not we think we have some set of responses, not answers, not definitive answers, but some set of responses to these final two questions. Do Black Lives matter? And if they mattered, what might look different in our country? So I'm going to walk through these definitions of Black Lives and Matter, and these are just my definitions with a recognition that these are contested. Okay, so Blackness. All right. Just let me propose this. Race is not real. All right. Now, I get into trouble around this every once in a while. A picture of Rachel Dolezal is not next. Nor, by the way, did I ever say, no matter what the conservative blogs tell you, that Darth Vader was racist because he was Black. That is also had not been what I had said, no. What I did say was that Star Wars was cowardly because all through the damn 70s and 80s, we had listened to James Earl Jones's voice coming out of Darth Vader, and we were all real interested in how he was going to be the daddy of the white twins. And we knew it was totally possible, at least in my family. We were like, this is going to be fascinating. How are they going to do this? So we were waiting. We waited through 3 damn movies, and then he took the thing off, and he was a white dude, and we were pissed. So what I had said was that Star Wars did a racially cowardly thing by not allowing us to just have James Earl Jones and then work through how he had the white twins. That is what I said. Okay. There were things about having a cable show that were irritating. But here's what I want to do, especially for a space like San Francisco, but not exclusively, because I think it's important for us when the pushback to Black Lives Matter is all lives matter. I think one of the most important things for us to do is to get a little bit of definitional possibility and expansiveness around the possibility of Blackness. So I'm going to talk about Blackness in 2 different ways. I'm going to talk about Blackness both as a thing that we define as and might think of as what we would call typically, normally, traditionally understood as Black, by which I will mean those people who are descended from those folks who were enslaved in the American South, which is an important definition of Blackness. It's a critical definition of Blackness. It is a crucial definition of Blackness. It is one that allows me to be in the definition of Blackness. I have a great-great-great-great-grandmother who was sold on a street corner in Churchill in Richmond, Virginia. It is, however, just FYI, a definition of Blackness that would not include the President of the United States, right? Whose father is not an immigrant because he wasn't staying, a student from Kenya. Would include his wife, but not him. So I want us to have some broad definition. Now, it would have included his body because we understand that in all moments of American history, a person born to a student from Kenya and a white woman would have been enslavable, would have been Jim Crowed, right? But in this moment, I mean, it was one of my favorite things. I was in Chicago when he ran against Alan Keyes in 2004, and my most favorite thing that happened in the 2004 Senate race was when Alan Keyes was like, I support reparations, and Barack Obama is not eligible for them. And everybody was like, right? Because race is not real, right? Race is a weird, funky construction of an American system meant to do very particular things. It's why we got to be careful, Black folks, when we start policing the boundaries of Blackness, because at all points, right, when we get real essentialized with our racial definitions, in the end, it never ultimately works out for us. So I get it. I know race feels real. Feels real. Right on the top of our heads. I get it. But I also want to provide this other definition of blackness, one that is actually offered for us by one of our great African-American thinkers at the turn of the 20th century. And it is a notion of blackness that is also understood as a kind of blackness as constitutive of this identity of being problematic. So this is Du Bois in The Souls of Black Folk, writing at the turn of the 20th century, in which he says, between me and the other world, there's ever an unasked question, unasked by some through feelings of delicacy, and by others through the difficulty of rightly framing it, all nevertheless flutter round it. How does it feel to be a problem? Now, again, let me work through this for just a second. I promise I won't go this slowly on all the slides. This one is just... So, I'm a college professor. I've been a college professor my entire professional life. That means I hang out with a lot of 18-year-olds. They have been having the same conversation about race forever. And it goes something like this. Privileged white people, shut up. Let me tell you about my feelings. And the privileged white people are like, screw you, I have problems too. And both things are true. Because here is the reality. There is no set of privileged identities that keep a human being from having problems. No amount of whiteness, heterosexuality, maleness, wealth, cis identity will keep a human being from experiencing a life that also has problems. Even if you are rich and white and male and cis and all of those things, the human condition is to have problems. Steve Jobs died young. Human beings have problems. They have barriers and challenges and concerns, and it's just humanity. Ma'am. Du Bois does not say, how does it feel to have problems? He says, how does it feel to be a problem? The difference that constitutes blackness, the thing that is blackness in Du Bois's definition, isn't how does it feel to have problems, that's the human condition. It is how does it feel to be a problem. You, in your humanity, in your body, you actually are a problem. So you go to sit down at the lunch counter, you create a problem by entering into that space, right? So the reason I want us to have a somewhat broader Catholic with a little c definition of blackness is not to say that all versions of humanity that constitute problems are all the same, but there's a kind of residual blackness that can emerge for us. So that, for example, trans bodies are black in a kind of ontologically black way, in that they create a problem for gender identity. Right? We are so advanced in our current capacity to predict the sex of a baby now that I can tell you before I can even see, right, the growth of a penis, I can tell you just from a blood test, right, at prior to 12 weeks, whether or not the baby that you are going to have will have the genitalia of a penis or a vagina when it is born. And we gender that and say you're having a boy or a girl. And we get excited about that, and we start painting stuff blue and pink and just naming people, and because that's how we understand gender. If we take trans identity very, very seriously, it creates a problem for us, because then we say, hey, Ari, what do you have? And you're like, I don't know, a little human, and maybe around 12, they'll let me know. Right? That's a problem. It actually creates a problem. Disabled bodies create a problem for us because we see ourselves as having to retrofit buildings that are expensive for us. Man, you want to talk about something that creates a problem, be a human body with a uterus that might, give birth in the US. Now, this is not to say, I want to be really clear that I'm going to put all human bodies with uteri, especially those that might be undocumented, or that I want to put all trans bodies, or that I want to put, right? But I do want to say that when I say blackness, I just want to expand the definition just a little bit. I want to just give us a little version of ontological blackness that says, when I say Black Lives Matter, in part what I am talking about is all those bodies that get policed because they are inherently problems. So when I say Black lives, I mean problematic lives. I mean problems to the state. I mean that if those bodies and those lives were just allowed to be free, were just allowed to be full expressions of themselves, that they would in fact transform our very understanding of humanity, of Americanness, of citizenship, of the very sense of who we are as a people. And in so doing, would potentially expand and destroy and challenge and upturn categories in ways that are, real Black with it. Okay? So that's the first thing I want to do, is just, while still preserving space for a version of Blackness that is historically rooted in the very specific set of historical, socio-political experiences of Blackness that we understand to come out of intergenerational chattel slavery. Okay? Both of those things, same time. All right? Stick with me. I know people are like, uh-oh, here we go. Now specifically, because what I want to claim is that what Black bodies do is they disrupt and cause problems for our understanding about what the American project is. My single biggest irritation in this particular election cycle is the idea that Mr. Trump is somehow doing something to the American ideals, that he is somehow disrupting the thing that is America. That America, up until this moment, has been all about soaring ideals of togetherness, pluralism, diversity, freedom, meritocracy, goodness, inclusion. And somehow poor Mr. Trump has come along and just destroyed them. And see, the way that we disrupt that little fairy tale is Blackness. So what I want to suggest is the problem that it feels like being, that Du Bois asks about, that everyone is fluttering around, is that Black bodies give lie to the idea that America has always been about these big ideas. Black bodies, over and over again, challenge the idea about what America is. This is a country founded on freedom. And in certain ways it is. I don't want to suggest completely that it's not. I grew up in the shadow of Monticello, literally in Charlottesville, in the shadow of Monticello. I am a big fan of the Declaration of Independence. I genuinely like that document, genuinely. I mean, it's a damn good document. If you were going to write a sentence in your life, write that sentence, right? Write the sentence that says, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all persons are created, cleaned it up a little bit on gender, right? That all persons are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Write that sentence down, even if it is patently false. Even if there could be nothing less self-evident on the Monticello Mountain in 1776. But strive towards it, right? Create this thing for which the country could move towards. But the idea that that is what we are in 1776 is given lie by the bodies of Black people. It is important to remember that this is a practice almost exclusively that occurs in the context of citizenship. That lynching is for the most part not a practice of enslavement. This is one of the most difficult images of lynching, and I won't linger here long, in part because it still feels like such a violation of the privacy of the citizens and men who are lynched in this image. But I want to linger here for just a moment. because I want you to look at the faces of the lynchers. And the reason I want you to look at their faces is because you can see them. Because the story that we tell is that people came in the night with their faces hidden under sheets. The hardest part of this picture for me, always, is this here. Have you ever stood in a public space with your beloved and just kind of reached back and just, kind of grabbed hands at a concert, at a talk where you just kind of remind each other that you're there? There's a moment when the wives of the men who murdered Emmett Till come out from the courthouse, and they're standing there. Their husbands have been found not guilty, and they rest their heads on their husband's shoulders. They're mothers. Emmett Till was 14. That action is always the hardest moment for me to take. That little act of love, of affection in the midst of such brutality. I just want you to see, so that the next time someone says to you that what America is doing at the Trump rallies is the first time, no, sir. No, ma'am. Don't you dare behave as though Mr. Trump is some aberration. Our belief that we are this great meritocracy. This is, of course, Elizabeth Eckford standing at the intersections of race and gender and poverty. It's important to know that the reason that Elizabeth Eckford is the one of the Little Rock Nine who finds herself in the mob being yelled at while the other 8 are with Daisy Bates is because Elizabeth Eckford is the only one of the Little Rock Nine who doesn't have a private phone in her home. She just doesn't have quite as, she's a little more working class than the rest of the kids. And so they decide to meet somewhere else. She doesn't get the phone call that night. So she ends up not getting the call. So she ends up not meeting the other of the Little Rock Nine. So she's alone. It's also really important to know that Elizabeth Eckford made that skirt herself. Who are we that we follow the girl who made the skirt herself to go to school? And we scream at her. And now we want to talk about why is there an education gap? And why can't we this is 10 minutes ago. This was 10 minutes ago. Elizabeth Eckford isn't dead. I know it's in black and white, but this wasn't some multiple, Elizabeth Eckford is alive right now. Son was shot by police. Mental health illness. Our democracy. Look how many of these images were in your film, Jeff. This was 10 minutes ago. Again, something about the black and white makes us believe that it was many, many years ago. And again, I teach children who were born 15 seconds ago. They do not know that there was a previous President Clinton, and it gives me many feelings. This really was not long ago. So the idea that we have this robust democracy for some long period of time in this country is also simply not true. This idea that we have this functioning justice system. It's not true. So what I want to suggest is that blackness is this thing that is more expansive than simply these bodies. It is the thing that is constantly challenging our idea that America is built on and sustained by these sets of ideas. Okay, so now lives. What do we mean when we say lives? Black lives matter. Now we're on to lives. Okay, so let's begin with this notion of the capacity to breathe, right? So whatever else we think lives are, lives begin for human beings with that capacity to breathe. And it turns out that there's actually substantial evidence to suggest that racism, structural, and as it is experienced in stress, and as it is experienced through one's belief that one has experienced racism, actually impacts health outcomes. When we say I can't breathe, it is not only a mantra in homage to Eric Garner, it is in fact a reality. I literally cannot breathe. One of the most stunning being the continued dynamic around infant mortality. So in this country, as you can see, we've made extraordinary progress on infant mortality overall. We have substantially improved the likelihood that any infant in this country who is born alive will make it to their first birthday. But while the floor has been raised, the gap remains. So just so you know how this is defined, a black infant is defined as an infant born to a black woman. This is really important for what we now know about why this gap persists. So an infant born to a black woman versus an infant born to a white woman. So an infant born to a black woman is still in this country twice as likely to die before their first birthday as an infant born to a white woman. And the most stunning thing about this is that nothing closes the gap. Not socioeconomic status, not marital status, not access to health insurance, not prenatal care, not all the comorbidities of gestational diabetes, not whether or not one has obesity, none of those things. All the things that you would think were like, oh, well, that's not really race. It is, nope, race. And we know race isn't real. We know that if you have a car accident and I give you my blood, you're not going to be black. It's just not real. It's just not. I mean, you might want it to be, but you're not. So why is this? So research and research and research, and over again, what it looks like, and this is the one that is just, whoa, it just eats at me. So it looks like the studies show over and over again that it appears that the strongest correlation has to do with experiences of childhood racial stress, not stress experienced during pregnancy. Not stress experienced during pregnancy, but black women reporting childhood experiences of race-based stress. So you remember in 3rd grade when your white friend found out you were black? And found out what race was and then decided they couldn't be your best friend anymore? That, low birth weight. Remember when you didn't go to the 6th grade swim party? Because you know, that. Remember when your family didn't get the housing? That. Now researchers are going back farther. This may in fact be intergenerational, born into us, carried in wombs, such that in this country where children always took the status of the father, except in one case, which is if you were born to an enslaved woman, the one case where children took on the status of the mother, so that the first gift of the womb of a black woman was enslavement intergenerationally, such that even in the 21st century, low birth weight and infant mortality continue to be a birthright. Heart disease. Turns out, John Henryism, y'all know the story of John Henry, right? Steel driving man, he's going against the steam drill, right? Y'all know John Henry, right? They're going through the mountain, right? And he's got the hammer. And why we tell this story to our children, I do not know, but we do, right? So you go in, he has the hammer and the steam drill, and they go through the mountain, and they break through the mountain, and John Henry beats the steam drill, and then he gets to the other end, and he has a heart attack, and he dies, right? Okay, so literally, so it turns out if you're a black man, and you have an active coping style, but you have low socioeconomic status, cardiovascular disease goes up. So when we go around, my brother's keeper and people, and we tell them, hey, all you poor kids, do more, work harder, we're literally killing them. Actually, sit your ass down till somebody brings you some stuff. literally. Now, if you have socioeconomic, if you got some richness, work your ass. Work, little white boy. Work harder. Go, go, go. Literally clogging their little arteries. Lives, 2005. Keep wondering if we had said, instead of refugees, look at all those Democrats stuck on the roof of their home. Somebody would have gone to get us. In 2006, just down the road from where Hurricane Katrina happened, you know, the story of Jenna 6. Keep wondering, the one part of the story I keep wondering isn't why is there a white tree in 2006? I mean, I'm not even asking that part of the question. It's Louisiana. Not even why is there a fight? I want to know, why did the white kids know after the black kids sat under the white tree? Why did the white kids know to hang a noose in the tree? Why did the white kids know to hang a noose in the tree? I mean, we don't teach history very well. Why do they know that? Why do they know that if you want to terrorize black kids, the thing you do to terrorize the black kids after they sat under the tree is you hang a noose? But then we, as a country, we elect President Obama. We really do, like enthusiastically. Because America's kind of a crazy place. So, and then the next thing that happens, and I always leave this one in here. And I always leave this one in here. Because no one dies. And so since no one dies, I think we miss it. But it's so important because this ends up being the whole presidency. And it ends up being the whole story of what happens over the course of the next 8 years. And it's easy to miss because it was light and it was almost funny. But Skip Gates gets arrested in his house, right? So you remember, Skip, he's the head of the Du Bois Institute at Harvard. I remember when I got the call. Now, there are some black professors who, if you get the call that they've been arrested, you know, Cornell. You know, Michael Eric Dyson, me. You'd be like, well, yeah, sure they did. We got the call like Skip Gates got arrested. We were like, come on now. Because you don't live in post-racial America and I don't live in post-racial America, but Skip has lived in post-racial America since like 86, right? So just in case you have forgotten the story, because it's been a while, let me help you remember the story. Skip Gates is coming home from the vineyard. I want to walk y'all all the way through the story. Skip is coming home from the vineyard. His driver pulls up in front of the house in Cambridge that Harvard owns, but he has lifetime rights to live in. Oh, this is y'all's world. Okay, so he's coming home from the vineyard, and his driver pulls up in front of the Cambridge house, and he's forgotten his keys. So the driver goes around to the back, and Skip goes around to the front, and they're kind of trying to find, you know, a door that's open, and the neighbor looks out and sees two black guys trying to get into the house and calls the police. By the time the police get there, they've gotten into the house, they're in the living room, the police officers come in. And they say to Skip, sir, I'm gonna need you to come out to the front porch. And Skip looks at him and says, and I know he said it, I'll see your mama on the front porch. Now, there's so many, and then he gets arrested, and then, you know, the president says in a press conference the Cambridge police were acting stupidly, using an adverb, and therefore cementing my love of the president for all of time. And then it all ends in a beer summit. But it's important because everything that's going to happen for the rest of it turns out to be about this. But we sort of missed it, right? Because this is important to recognize. Who throws the very first important fundraiser for Senator Obama? Right? This is 2009, right? This is August of 2009. In January of 2009, we've just inaugurated the first black president from Chicago. Now, who threw the very first really big time fundraiser? Skip, of course, on the Vineyard for the guy who's just been inaugurated, right? The first black president has just been inaugurated 6 months before. This dude threw the big fundraiser for him at the Vineyard that they've just come from, right? He thinks the world has changed, right? He's just come from the Vineyard. He probably was just chilling, probably with like Barack and Valerie and Eric Holder. Like, they probably just been like, So of course when this Yahoo motherfucker walks up in his house, he's like, I'll see your mama on the front porch. I mean, of course he did. I was just the prick of the face. Whoa. Whoa. And then the state entered in. Bam. And then nothing had changed. And this ends up being the whole thing. And we sort of miss it because it's like, oh, the president waded in on race. Oh, should he have, shouldn't he have? Oh, there's a beer summit. Oh, this is all kind of weird. Oh, Biden is in the Rose Garden drinking. No, the Skip has never had a beer in his life. This is kind of weird. What is, But then the whole rest of it is this. The whole rest of it is the question of whether or not these black men and these black women who just elected this man president changed a damn thing in this country. Whether or not they are actually citizens. Whether or not they can actually stand there and say to the police, I know you didn't. Or whether or not they are going to have to continue to stand on their knees and crawl and defer and So then we killed Troy Davis, and then we killed Trayvon Martin, and then we killed Jordan Davis, and then we reelect the president, and then we shoot Idea Pendleton, who had just marched past the president in his second inauguration, and then while we're having some kind of damn fight about Obamacare, Miriam Carey gets confused and gets shot to death by the Capitol Police while her 1-year-old is in the backseat of the car and they can see the baby in the car. And then Renisha McBride has a car accident and asks for help and gets shot to death instead. And then John Crawford does what a million of us have done 1,000,000 times. He walks into a store and he picks up an item that is sold in that store and he walks around absent-mindedly in that store, holding that item in that store while talking on the phone to his girlfriend. And they walk in and they shoot John Crawford in the Walmart. And then they shoot Michael Brown. And whether Michael Brown should have been shot or not, you think when a city is grieving and angry that the response to it might not be to tear gas that city for weeks on end. And then they killed Eric Garner and he could not breathe. And then they shot Akai Gurley. And then we killed Tamir Rice when he was 12 years old. And then we said, well, he didn't respond the first time. And I don't know about you, but I've had 12-year-olds and they don't ever respond the first time you say shit to them. And then we shot Walter Scott while he ran away. And then Eric Harris was killed. And it seems that all the police officers on the scene actually did the right thing. But the freaking civilian who was riding with the police officers because he was a donor to the police force, he pulled his gun instead of his taser because, you know, he gets to ride around and make arrests too. Then we broke Freddie Gray's back. And then we took Sandra Bland into custody. And we killed Laquan McDonald in 2014, but we didn't get to see the tape until 2015. And then when Tony LaGreer went home from college on his winter break, and you gotta wonder if his dad will ever get over the fact that his son was having a breakdown. He just didn't know what to do. So he called the police for help. And so they came and they shot him and his neighbor. And then they sued her family because the police officer was so upset from having killed her. And those same Chicago police
In 2015,
killed Pierre.
Mario Wood, San Francisco.
Oh, baby, I'm coming to San Fran. I'm coming. Y'all got your whole own section. And we just took Simone Marshall into custody, and she called her family every single day. And then she was just gone. And it's not a small thing. Happens all the time. Happens all the time. So that's Black and that lives. And so what do we mean by matter? How do we know when something matters? So I want you to consider Mamie Till. I want you to consider Mamie Till opening Emmett's casket. One of the most extraordinary realities is that you cannot read a memoir of the civil rights movement without them talking about the impact of the Jet magazine story about Emmett Till. Not only that, you can't read an anti-colonial movement from West Africa at this time without them talking about Emmett Till. You can't read an anti-apartheid memoir from the 1980s without them talking about Emmett Till. The impact of Mamie Till's decision to open Emmett Till's casket and let the world see what lynching looked like was world-changing. Not because lynching hadn't been going on, but because somehow it mattered to us to see it. Not because racism was over, not because everyone's heart was changed, but there was a kind of mattering that occurred in that moment. Consider what happens in Selma in 1965. I have to say, one of the most eye-opening experiences of my life was covering the 50th anniversary of the Selma March for MSNBC. Man, cable news is some evil, stupid shit. One of the things that we do is we create these graphic packages. And so the graphics package was 50 years since Bloody Sunday, and it had this sound, and it was like, Bloody Sunday! Like it was like somehow like celebratory and exciting or something. So at one point I was standing next to Representative Lewis, and like in my ear, he can't hear, but I can hear it in my ear, Bloody Sunday! And I'm thinking, this isn't like representational blood, this isn't theoretical blood, like this is this actual person standing next to me. His blood. So I asked him, I just said, what do you remember from that day? And he said to me, it was cold. He said, mostly I remember how cold it was, and so that's why I was wearing the coat. I haven't ever looked at those pictures quite the same again, him in the coat, how many of the protesters are wearing it's Alabama, right? It's springtime in Alabama, but it's a kind of cold day. But the brutality against those demonstrators in Selma, the effect that it had in creating the fulcrum necessary to pass the 65 Voting Rights Act. So when we ask, how do we know that something matters? How does it begin to change our world when we see it? So I showed you all of those slides. We watched Jeff's video. My producers, the amount of time that we would watch, over the 4 years that I was on and hosting that show, the number of people I watched die, the number of videos that we watched, we got one email one time from third floor, which is where the administrator, the bigwig sat. It was after our journalism colleagues had been killed on video in Virginia when they'd been shot, and we got an email that said, while you guys are cutting tape, because you have to go through and you have to cut tape, and so you have to watch it a lot. You have to make decisions about what's going to be. Everybody take care of yourselves. We know this is going to be a hard time. And the number of times I've watched little girls get thrown out of their desks or sat on by officers at pool parties, or the one time somebody thought maybe we might be having a hard time with it was when journalists were, and we did, we had a hard time with it when journalists, but no one ever thought it might be brutalizing or painful. So, I don't know if you could publish Emmett Till's broken body anymore, and it would matter. If seeing the bodies hanging from the trees anymore matters. If John Lewis being beaten on the bridge anymore matters. Consider this. Consider the divide that in the Zimmerman verdict, that 54% of non-Hispanic whites believed that the verdict was right, and only 7% of non-Hispanic African Americans, blacks, thought that the verdict was right. Now, I'm not even asking you to come to a decision on it, just to see how large the gap is. Consider this. Consider that across this period that I'm showing you about these deaths, I just want you to see that in December of 2014, among white Americans, that going back to 1995, white Americans are recording the highest confidence in local police on record. So that not only are black folks experiencing this sense of siege and brutality, but their neighbors seem to be saying to them, yeah, we are feeling okay about this. And I want you to consider this, that in the case of the Ferguson decision, that there is, again, an extraordinary gap in how black and white folks are receiving and understanding what is going on. I am showing you this because, again, I want you to remember race is not real in some biological way. It is not about blood coursing through your body or genetic material making it impossible for us to see one another, but that experience of being a problem, of actually in your body constantly challenging the very thing that the state is, versus wanting to believe that what your country is freedom, democracy, meritocracy, creates such an enormous perceptual gap that this experience of encountering the state, of even seeing the same thing when we look at this. Consider this, that the Chicago Police Department's own data demonstrate that the police stopped without justification, verbally and physically abused, and in some instances arrested and then detained without counsel. The widely held that police have no regard for the sanctity of life when it comes to the lives of people of color. That Edward Nero is now the second officer acquitted in Baltimore. Meanwhile, people mad as hell about Beyonce. So then what should we make of the flag coming down in South Carolina? Or of the idea that now Dylann Roof will face death penalty in both federal and state charges? Well, so, except black people, we not really. Because if you remember, what was the first damn question every Negro in South Carolina was asked? Have you forgiven? So like, I don't know. So how many of us have to die while praying for the damn flag? They should have come down 100 years ago. Come down. I don't know. It's nice the flag came down. Thank you, Nikki. That seems fine. But that could have come down 100 years ago with actually really no one dying. That would have been fine. And I don't know. It's fine. Dylan Roof's gonna die or not die or whatever. But him dying, whatever. Because it seems like that's a little cleansing of you. It seems like you killing him is a little cleansing of you. So now you gonna kill that little baby who you made him. You made him. You did that. You did that. And he seemed like a hot mess, but you made that. So maybe you should just stand and be accountable for that. Because we aren't really down for y'all killing people. Because we know better than to support the death penalty. Because we know for every one Dylan Roof,
Okay, come on, Melissa.
so I just want to say this. It's real clear to me that everything happening up in here is telling us Black lives don't matter at all. Bernie ain't doing nothing in this little fight with Hillary that got anything to do with Black folks. Y'all can love Bernie. Y'all can hate Bernie. I don't care. I truly don't. Y'all can love or hate Hillary. I do not. This is probably why I'm not on the air, because I assure you that the main thing occurring with this Bernie thing is actually a very clear statement about the president. What he is mostly saying is, if the Black dude who was on the city council in Chicago could beat her, surely I should be able to. So just watch. Be real careful.
And why do you go for president?
And
I think you'd be a badass president.
I would. I wouldn't. That is true. And Donald Trump, and I think we're very clear about where Donald Trump stands on us. But let me just be clear. I think there are two particular things we see around national politics on the Black Lives Not Mattering. One is around felon disenfranchisement. We know that it hits Black votes. And when I say Black, I mean, again, two versions of Black, both the folks we think of as traditionally Black, but also Black being all those ontologically problematic folks. We know it would actually change who becomes president if those folks could vote. We also know that in a gilded age where we have decided that wealth is the most important thing, that the wealth of Black folks has not only disappeared, but that gap continues to grow. So now we're in San Francisco. Okay, I'm gonna go faster. I know I'm late. So there's gonna be a couple slides that I'm gonna get to at the end that I just wanna say thank you to the Hayward Burns Institute for on this.
Yes, they did a great job.
So y'all supposedly so damn liberal, y'all can't even come visit me in North Carolina. Don't get me wrong. I appreciate that your mayor was like, okay, y'all passed HB 2, so none of y'all that can work here can even fly to North Carolina. I appreciate it. I appreciate how all the people have stood against HB 2, because HB 2 is some garbage, trash, terrible legislation. I will say, I would appreciate if y'all had gotten down with the same kind of intensity around the voting restrictions. Because part of the reason that HB 2 happened is because of the voting restrictions. Let's stay focused, people. So all of that is of a package. But for all y'all's liberalness, you have not necessarily been immunized. Also, just so you know, I also blame y'all for the end of my show, because this segment was on the very last MHP show. when one of the things that we fought for, because they tried to kill all of our Super Bowl segments, and so one of the things that we really fought for was a Super Bowl segment talking about gentrification in the Bay Area in the context of the Super Bowl. We really, there was all this they didn't want us, they just wanted us to talk straight primary politics, and we really wanted to talk in part about how things like we really wanted to talk about, in part, how events like the Super Bowl create these inequalities, right? So I do also just want to, in part, blame y'all for that. So again, for all of the critiques and or support that San Francisco gets for being a place that is presumably progressive, it does not and has not immunized this space from this challenge of the question of, again, ontological blackness.
San Francisco is Ferguson.
The confrontation of black and brown bodies with the state. The question of what it means to be able to be in public space, about whether or not you are considered inherently a problem. This is a place where, in the rest of the country, many people are looking to Harris as a kind of model of progressive leadership. It's been interesting for me, as the sister of a public defender, to always have a kind of second sight, behind the veil vision on that. To have Jeff Adachi pushing Attorney General Harris. That at a time when it is critical that, and this is part of why I want us to expand our definitions of blackness, so that we don't presume that being from a space or being from a race inherently means having a particular position around questions of justice, that we are always asking about actual practices. So everything in these graphics, again, so this is my thank you for these important graphics in terms of the data out of San Francisco. All of the San Francisco data look just like the national data. These data do not reflect a set of practices, public policies that are inherently more racially just than in other parts of the country. And so I come to the end. What then should we do to make true the assertion that Black Lives Matter? So I want to say two things. So you have maybe heard me talk about this before. I come from a quirky family. One aspect of my quirky family is my dad, who, when we were kids, would, and even today, always signs birthday cards, not "Love Daddy." He signs birthday cards, "The struggle continues, Daddy." I'm not kidding. 6 years old. The struggle continues, Daddy. I mean, you're 6. You're like, what? You're like, what is happening? Now, so there's a kind of value that in my adulthood I have found from that. It's a kind of like, no one promised you that you were going to get to live during the part of the struggle that's winning. You might be living during the part that's losing or that's experiencing the forward and the back. And no one said that you're the smartest, cutest, best, like the struggle has, and it will continue after you. Your job is to pick up one part of it. So there's value in a recognition that you are part of a continuing struggle and that you will not have all the answers. Your job is not to have all the solutions, but simply to engage in it, to be part of the work. And so there can be some value just in the recognition that there can be progress without having all the solutions. And yet, so we have to ask this question. And we have to ask this question. And we have to ask this question. And we have to ask this question. So, I'm going to give you this answer. I did. So this is my sister, Beth Hilton. She's one of your public defenders, and I'm going to give my answer in part based on having grown up as Elizabeth's sister. And it turns out based on, in part, what we've already seen today. That if we are to find answers to the continuing struggle, that it turns out that we are not going to always be able to go straight at it. That the solutions will not be direct, always, public policy solutions. Sometimes they will be, but they won't always be. The answer, in part, to our solutions will be that we are going to have to get creative. And so I'm going to quote here from Dr. King that the collective creative use of Black bodies can give voice to America's highest ideals, and that almost always it is the creative, dedicated minority that has made the world better. And in fact, that what we need is a kind of creative maladjustment to oppression. That we will begin by becoming artists in the context of oppression. Because creative maladjustment has always had a soundtrack. And here are a few principles for thinking about what creative maladjustment looks like. The artist respects no arbitrary boundary. And the artist refuses to be invisible. And the artist refuses to be silent. And the artist is unconcerned with authority, but deeply invested in community. And the artist knows that if they have a single light and one person who will listen, it's showtime. And the artist makes order out of chaos and chaos out of order, and the artist will change everything. And that's why we must never let Black bodies forget their ability to make art. This is part of why I was so excited to hear the work that you are doing in juvenile centers. It is so critical to me that the first thing they go and get from the public schools is the art programs, because you have to teach children that they can make something out of nothing. And if you allow them to forget that, it's the first thing they went and got out of the New Orleans schools. Right after Katrina, the first thing they went and got out of our schools was music and art and creativity, because they want you to think you can't make something out of nothing. Because as soon as you know that you can make something out of nothing, you are extraordinarily powerful. And so once we have creative democracy and we know we can go get the flag down all on our own, and once we have creative democracy that can disrupt these conversations, and once we have creative democracy that recognizes that we can speak, and once we have creative democracy that says we're gonna take that ish to courts. And so, with that, I will simply end by quoting Ella Baker, who says, "We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes." Thank you.
We have one other presentation to make. As Dr. W.D. Du Bois said, you've got to be. And so we got some 24-karat bling for Melissa to bring back on the plane. Because that's what we got to remember. We got to continue to be. Let's give it up for Melissa Harris Perry. Okay, we're going to go directly to our next panel. Ken Williams. And I'd please ask you to keep it down because we are televising the program. And it's difficult for everyone to hear, so please. Ken Williams is a decorated former homicide detective from the Brockton Police Department in the Boston area. For the past 3 years, he's worked as an expert consultant on the use of force and officer-involved shootings. He's worked on hundreds of criminal cases and has investigated 50 homicide cases. He's been called in to provide expert opinions on police shooting cases such as the death of Michael Brown, and he is here today to help us better understand the impact of San Francisco's use of force policies in recent police shootings. But we're going to begin with a video first that sort of provides an overview of use of force in San Francisco.
Just needed some help. Mario Wood's mother, Gwen, grieved as she made arrangements for her son's funeral. She said he suffered from mental health issues, but he was starting to overcome them.
Newly released video shows how quickly a confrontation escalated between a homeless man wielding a knife and San Francisco police.
Shots for the third time in 5 months killed a suspect. They were fired by a San Francisco police sergeant on a stolen car detail. The victim is a 27-year-old woman behind the wheel of this stolen car.
We have one witness that says that there was a back and forth with the vehicles, with the officers moving about.
Police say that woman wouldn't cooperate with the investigation and was driving forward and backwards after crashing the car in an attempt to get away. She died at the hospital from a single gunshot wound.
After weeks of protests and pressure, Today, I have arrived at a different conclusion to the question of how best to move forward.
And after another deadly police shooting,
I have asked Chief Sir for his resignation.
I'd like to introduce Ken Williams. So I'm going to start by asking Ken Williams a number of questions, but we'll also have an opportunity for you to ask questions. And so if you'd like to ask a question, there are ushers that have cards, and you can fill out a card and submit it to me. So, first of all, in talking about use of force, and let's just say welcome to San Francisco. You've come a long way, and thank you. What is the legal standard in terms of officers being able to use deadly force against another human being?
Certainly. There's the law that goes back that says under Graham that law enforcement officers who perceive themselves to be under threat or citizen under threat, to stop that threat can use upwards to lethal force. There's a continuum that they use that starts off with verbal, can go to hands, can go to other tools that they may have at their disposal, whether it's tasers, baton, mace, all the way up to the use of deadly force.
And you mentioned, Graham, that's the name of the case that the Supreme Court decided?
Yes. The case says that we as citizens can't armchair quarterback the officer's split-second decision. Has to come from the reasonableness of an officer placed in the shoes of that officer at the time, reviewing the use of force.
Now, that's a legal standard. How does San Francisco's current policy compare to that standard?
Right. Every police agency, ever since the ruling, can actually, through its own policy, create more guidance for police officers. That particular case that we're citing is offering very little guidance. The policies themselves can say, an officer must deploy certain tactics before escalating to the use of deadly force. The San Francisco Police Department use of force policy, I believe it had a date of '95, was the last time it was actually revised. In that policy, there's no de-escalation. In fact, one of the items in the policy says that using carotid artery chokehold is acceptable. And we know from Eric Garner that should never be acceptable. It also says in the policy that, an officer is not supposed to be shooting drivers in vehicles, but at the same time, there's a caveat later on in the policy that says, under certain circumstances, they may even break that policy. So the policy that is in place, by it not offering proper guidance, lends an excuse for the use of deadly force in encounters that should respect the sanctity of life and take other measures maybe before using the deadly force.
Now, Ken, you were a police officer for many years, a homicide detective as well. And as I mentioned, you've worked on hundreds and hundreds of cases. You've investigated personally 50 homicide cases. Now, you've not been able to study the file or the investigation in these cases because it's not made available to the public or anyone else. And so I understand you can't give us an opinion based on all the evidence whether the shootings were justified or not. But what I'd like to do is have you focus on analyzing these situations from what we know. Now let's start with the Mario Woods case. We saw the video earlier on, and it was also reported that Mr. Woods had allegedly stabbed a person in the arm prior to the incident. Now, I'm going to first ask some questions, and then we'll look at some photographs and stills that you pulled from the video. First of all, the fact that a person stabs someone else before the police encounter, does that give the police the absolute right to shoot somebody?
No, of course not. That by no means means that police can use deadly force to stop a person simply because a crime was caused or allegedly caused before police intercepted that individual.
What about the fact that he's holding a knife? Does the fact that somebody is holding a knife give the police the right to use deadly force and to shoot them? No, I mean, a person, police are about control. If I could just take a second. If we think about the origins of policing in America, there were one member or one group in society that was controlled by another group under some of the most heinous, oppressive conditions for hundreds of years. Policing law enforcement began as the Militia Act, which said that every white citizen aged 18 to 45 under state law, under colonial law, was to be armed to control 100% of black people. And laws were legislated, beginning in Virginia, that said that even at birth, if you were born by a mother, were baptized by a church, that was not in any way, shape, or form going to free you from chattel slavery. So we had policy, we had enforcement, and we had legislative act that created 100% oppression for several hundred years. And today, when you read through the policies of the San Francisco Police Department, it says throughout the entire message that it's delivering how to control people. Because at the end of the day, they're trying to control an individual to exact, have it go adjudicated at a courtroom, allegedly, and then if the person's found guilty, there'll be some form of punishment. What you see in the Mario Woods video is shocking because, and I want to express my condolences to all families that have lost a loved one, because it's shameful that the city, the elected officials, police department, probably have not said so publicly. I'm sorry for your loss. They should be saying that. They will never probably apologize. You could sue them into eternity and get $1 gazillion, and you will never, ever have one of them say they're sorry. And that's most unfortunate, because part of healing is having someone recognize the fault that was committed, but also giving you closure so that you're not fighting and being stressed out, trying to have closure while having accountability served. So I'm sorry for that. Jeff. I want to take you now through some photographs and stills that you took from the Mario Woods video. And I ask you just to explain why you selected these slides and what they show.
These are stills. When you look at video, video is evidence that each and every one of us can look at and interpret differently. That's what the law or judges will say. There's no one opinion that matters with respect to the evidence. That said, there are certain parts of the evidence that we probably mutually can agree on, that Mr. Woods is stopped by several police officers. He's stopped on a public street, and the officers are armed, and it would appear in the left photo, Mr. Woods is most likely armed. There are witnesses that are there that, in the video that was played earlier, a lady is shouting, "Drop something." So I'll presume that he has a knife. The officers have their guns out. Some officers have firearms out that have real bullets. Some officers have less than lethal guns out that are shotgun, long barrel rifle that may be armed with beanbag rounds, which is considered less than lethal force. Some officers have mace. Some officers have batons. So there's a range of each person that is there seeing what is playing out has the discretion, very important word, discretion, to try to figure out what force they want to employ to gain control. Another very important word. The picture to the right has Mr. Woods now up from a squatting position. The squatting position is kind of interesting. I can't decide what Mr. Woods is deciding to do or not do, but we would have to assume he's not going to attack someone from a squatting position. That's kind of difficult, right? So when he stands up and he puts his hands by his side, he's already been shot in the right photo with less than lethal force. He's already been sprayed with mace. Does that mean that police have to stop trying to negotiate with Mr. Woods and stop in the timeline of using any more less than lethal force? Why didn't they choose to use and continue to use less than lethal force? That is not something that I've heard the police answer. Is it that because our policy says that all we have to do is use a couple steps of less than lethal, hey, I've done it, check, I'm on my gun now, and check, that's what I'm gonna do. That's the problem with the policy, because it leaves a gap. It leaves it to the discretion of the officer to decide, hey, I'm done with this, 15, 30 seconds, a minute later, I'm done, I'm going to deadly force. But in this particular case, Mr. Woods is up. He walks and limps in the video, going along the side of a building, and the officers are still communicating with him.
Now, there's a concept that's known as proportionality. And as I understand it, it means that just because a suspect has a knife and then refuses to drop it, doesn't mean that the police then have the right to shoot him, because the suspect has not used any additional force. In other words, the officer's life isn't in any more danger than it was previously. Does that apply here?
Well, let's take it a step further. What if Mr. Woods turned a knife on himself and said, I'm going to kill myself? Would that give police the right to say, no, we're going to kill you first? So, in terms of proportionality, the law and the policies of the San Francisco Police Department are only talking about threat. And it's a perception. Threat of individual, the officer, or threat of other people that might be in danger. The problem when you look at the video as well is that we don't have two police officers there trying to control a scene. We have many police officers around. So the question becomes, in my mind, who's the supervisor? Why isn't the supervisor moving other people away who are public citizens to be out of harm's way? Another question I would have is, and it's partly contained in their policy, and it's also a limitation on their part at the police department. They don't have riot shields to create a barrier. They, in their training, obviously don't have de-escalation, use of force training currently. One of the most powerful tools that I learned to use as a police officer rather early in my career was being able to speak to someone. You'd be amazed how someone who may be having a mental health crisis, let's say, for instance, this morning when I got up and I needed to go across the street to the store, and I said, oh my God, I didn't bring any sneakers and all that stuff with me. So I had on a pair of shorts, my black dress socks, my shoes, white t-shirt, and, you know, I didn't look crazy, but to someone out there, they might have said, hey, what's going on with this guy? Is he okay, right? Does that justify, just because I might not look like everyone else, does that justify the intrusion to inquire whether or not I'm okay? Some people would say, hey, it's just a question. Are you okay? On this particular day, Mr. Woods wasn't okay for whatever reason. There are days everyone in this room has had a bad day at one point in your life. The majority of people, 300 million citizens in America, the majority of people who commit a crime never get caught. We have an opiate addiction that inflicts those who are afflicted by opiate heroin, some of the best pharmaceutical grade heroin on the face of the planet, because they go to the doctor, they get surgery done, and they had the best medical team that prescribed some opiate, and then they found themselves addicted. Are we going out and shooting all those people who are 90% afflicted after surgery of having a heroin problem? No, we're not. So I'm going to go back to the important word of discretion. The issue is, are we treating all people, whether they have a permanent or a temporary crisis, are we treating everyone the same? No, we're not, because the outcomes are different based on class, color, neighborhood, community, all types of conditions that, and I can't name them all because we'd be here all day just naming conditions. Implicit, explicit bias, racism. Was Mr. Woods, even though he was stopped by police, protected and served? There are people in this room, I'm one of them, I own a dog. There would be people in this room that would march down to City Hall looking to strangle somebody if they saw their cat or dog killed in the street like Mario Woods. So we have to go and think about our priorities. We have to change our mindset on how we're going to deal with people who are mentally ill, whether it's permanent or temporary. And as the keynote speaker said, some people are stressed out for a number of different reasons, but they're not being all treated the same. Law enforcement is not an equal opportunity enforcer. It is selectively, by discretion, killing some and not all the same.
Let's quickly look at the other photos that you selected, and again, just if you can describe for us what's in this next group of videos.
I mean, when we look at these photos and you see left and right, officers have space, distance between themselves and who they perceive to be a threat. Some still have firearms out. Some are using less than lethal force, which shows Mr. Woods crouching down a little bit. This idea that somehow black men have superhuman strength, that they're 8 feet tall. Tamir Rice was a grown man, and that he posed a superior threat to officers that arrived on scene is absolutely ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. So now we're back to the discretion portion. How we perceive society. Every police officer originated from that community, your community, our community. They came from the same schools that we all attended. They live in the community that we all pay taxes in. And somehow, in a police department, the racism that exists in the street has found itself in the PD. And that's a problem, because they're hired to protect and serve you, but if they're clearly biased, how can they do that equally? How can they do that fairly? How can they do that with care? And how is it that none, or very few at least, in all of the years that Chief Sir was the chief, in all of the years that the people that are looking to move up in his absence, how many complaints originate from the people within the police department to correct the culture? They're responsible for the culture that says Black lives don't matter. Jeff.
What do we have there here in this photo? What do we see there?
In this photo, we now have officers shooting at Mr. Mario Woods. The policy says to control the individual if there's a perceived threat for the officer or citizens, they may exercise upwards of deadly force to neutralize and control that threat. What does that mean? Officers shoot to stop the threat. They don't shoot to wound, they shoot to stop the threat. They aim center mass, wherever that is, to stop the threat.
Two of the questions from the audience concern why couldn't the police just shoot a suspect in the leg? And it's because they were only trained to shoot in the chest area?
Right. The police training that police receive nationally is they're on, if you can imagine, if this stage was a firing range, and that's where the silhouettes were, and we had Jeff, myself, and someone else down on this end, and we're probably 15 yards away from this wall. At some point, we're going to advance and we're going to get 15 yards, maybe 10 yards, and then less than 10 yards. In this particular photo, you're looking at people who are probably within 7 yards, 5 yards of Mr. Woods. If the training is that everyone that's on the firing line within 5 yards, if your training is, okay, this is a qualification round, everyone, whatever you got left in your clip, you empty out. What do you think is going to happen when you're under stress, having the discretion to shoot somebody? You're possibly going to empty your clip. And that might explain why Mr. Woods is shot almost 20 times, I believe. That might explain why some officers are shooting and some officers aren't shooting. Another issue, and it's not disclosed publicly by the San Francisco Police Department. What's the experience of the officers that decided to shoot versus the experience of the officers that were reserved in their discretion and decided that maybe a baton was the best use of force, or continuing with mace? In the video, there's one officer that's running back to his cruiser before all the shots are fired, maybe to go reload up on less than lethal force, I'm not sure. So the issue, of course, has to be, from the public side, how do you prevent the next Mario Woods murder, next homicide? That's very important.
You mentioned less than lethal force, that some of the officers had batons. What do we see in this photograph here?
The officer in image number 2, closest to the camera, and the officer that's in image number 1, closest to Mr. Mario Woods, who's on the ground now, he's proned out on the ground. Question is, are they still shooting at Mr. Woods while he's on the ground? At some point in time, officers start or stop shooting, and the officer that is in image number 2, in image number 3, you can see he has his baton out. It's a metal baton. Image number 4, he reaches down to the ground to collapse the baton. So his perception, being furthest away from Mr. Mario Woods, but closest to the people who were videotaping the incident, was that he didn't have to use lethal force, even if Mr. Mario got by the officers.
Okay. And that's something I don't think that has been said before. And we see this here. The officer, who seems to be a senior officer, doesn't even have a firearm out, and he has his baton in his hand.
That's correct. Image number 1 shows his collapsible baton now, and he's now going to put it away. Image number 2 has him walking up to the other officers who have their firearms out, and he's going to signal to everyone, put them away. And then he's going to approach Mr. Mario Woods.
Okay. Now, why would different officers believe that different levels of force are necessary? Is that a training issue?
It's a perception issue, and it's by discretion. I remember when I was a young officer, you would hear on the radio occasionally where someone said, signal 13. And that was a code that wherever that officer was, he was having a problem. After a few years on the force, I realized the same people somehow found themselves yelling out signal 13 an awful lot, right? Why the heck are they always having problems and they now need all of the other people to show up to bail them out? Why is that? It's because they're not very good people. They weren't very good at communication. Some of them would try to berate people, escalate, not deflate. And because some people in law enforcement should not be in law enforcement, we have a problem in America where trying to fire an incompetent person in policing has to change if we're going to have the culture, custom, pattern, and practice of law enforcement change. We've got to be able to terminate people who are unfit. And for folks who commit crimes in that uniform, they've got to go to jail.
You mentioned the Tamir Rice shooting, and you talked about time and distance. I'm going to show you the video in the Tamir Rice case, just a portion of it. Now, we watched the Luis Gongora video as well, and although you can't see the actual shooting as you do here in the shooting of Tamir Rice, it happens very quickly. I mean, you can hear what appears to be two beanbag shots, and then right afterwards, there's a number of shots which are fatal. When you talk about time and distance, what can we glean from what's happening here?
I mean, in the Tamir Rice video, the passenger is a rookie officer, inexperienced. The driver is a veteran officer that is the training officer for the rookie. So we have the veteran officer making all of the mistakes, driving the vehicle very rapidly towards a person that police are told may possess a gun. When you do that, you lose your cover. You lose your skill to be able to maybe stop a distance away, use your vehicle for cover, yell to the person, hey, show me your hands. By the way, I got my gun out, so don't do anything strange, please. You lose the effectiveness of being able to communicate. Tamir Rice was shot within, I think it was 20 seconds. The officer, because he's on the passenger side of the car pulls up rapidly, comes to a skidding stop. He jumps out, thinks that he sees what is a real gun, when in fact it was a pellet gun, perfectly legally sold at Walmart, off the shelf, no special licensing required in the state of Ohio. And he shoots 12-year-old Tamir Rice dead. Other problem with this video. After he shoots him, does anyone see the police officers running to the aid of the individual now shot? Eric Gardner, did we see officers running to the aid of the person he just choked out? That's a problem. That goes towards your mindset. After you commit the act, and let's say, for instance, you got that all wrong, where's your compassion for the person you just shot? Where's the oops, oh my God, well, this isn't even real, but wow, let's take care of the person that is now bleeding out. Where's the community caretaker doctrine? Where is the concern for the body, the person that you just exercise force against? I would say that every person in this room, if you saw someone shot right here, some of you would have the momentary, oh my God, and then a moment later, you'd be running over there to say, let me see what I can do to help. When we think about those photos of people standing around the lynching scene, holding hands, smiling, there's a little history about those 4,500 or so lynchings that let me share with you. They were actually publicized in the local papers hours before the events. That's the reason why all those people showed up. The photographers worked for the newspaper, and that's the reason why they're all great photos showing faces. Everyone that showed up understood what was going to take place, and they showed up and they wanted to have their photo taken because all of those photos ended up in the US mail as postcards. That's how crazy it got, and that's how crazy it is.
I like to contrast the video in the Mario Woods case and the Tamir Rice case to a video of an individual who was discovered with a knife in a public place in Camden, New Jersey. Now, the Camden, New Jersey Police Department has recently gone through an extensive use of force training prior to this incident. Let's take a quick look at that video, and if you can, describe what it appears to show. Okay. Yeah, apparently we don't have that video, but let me describe it. It shows a man who's wildly swinging his arm around. He's holding a knife in a public place. It looks like a Jack in the Box or some fast food place. Then he begins walking down the street. And what the police do is they surround him as he's walking down the street. He's walking rather quickly, but they form a V around him, so he's completely surrounded. They continue to follow him for what seems to be an eternity. It's probably 10 or 15 minutes. Then, as he's swinging his arm around, he's doing this entire time, swinging the knife, he drops it. And at that point, they take him into custody. You've seen the video. We've showed that to you. How does that differ from what we saw?
Well, part of the difference is Camden, New Jersey, where this video takes place, actually went through reforms. And their use of force policies had to change. And in their use of force policies, they adopted certain de-escalation tactics, also recognized the sanctity of life and the fact that in regards to policing, it was better to try to go and protect that life and not have a use of deadly force or officer-involved shooting. They adopted a policy that said, if we create distance, we follow, we separate potential people who might be harmed, and we try to negotiate with the person, whether they're in a temporary or permanent mental health state, maybe we can get an opportunity to save a life. That makes heroes. Everybody in that video who could have used their discretion to say, enough of this, I'm not going to walk a block and a half, I'm actually going to shoot this person right now. Lawfully, could they have done that? Sure. But because the policy, even though the law said that they were legally capable of doing that, the policy said, wait a minute, we better put conditions in place that say that's not acceptable here. And that's the reason why those officers used every tool available to prevent having to take deadly force against that individual. Let me give you another case. Kenneth Chamberlain Sr., White Plains, New York. Veteran. He is in his 60s, retired corrections officer, living at home alone, 2 o'clock in the morning. He has a life alert pendant around his neck that accidentally goes off. It calls life alert, he's asleep, he doesn't respond. Police are notified with 911. They go to his home. An hour later, after he's telling them through his door, I'm okay, you can leave, they break down his door and they shoot and kill him inside of his apartment. Shoot him dead. Drag his body out, handcuff him. We have a serious problem in America, and it's because, again, if there's no accountability, or very little of it, if no one is going to jail that's responsible for these acts, another caveat, they called him the N-word before they shot and killed him. And it was captured on the Life Aid alert because it had an audio inside the apartment which captured everything. No officer's ever been charged. No officer has been convicted. We're living in a very, very bad place that if we don't correct, I don't know where it's going to go, but people are marching in the streets by the hundreds of thousands, frustrated. They're looking for elected officials to legislate law, policy, to correct something that is long-standing in this community, which is lynchings of certain people have been acceptable. and it is not acceptable. One of the proposals I had for all those lynching photos, now that we're in an age of facial recognition that went around the world and people are talking about, is maybe we should use facial recognition software now that we have a gazillion people on Facebook and stuff, and see if we can identify all those people. Murder's murder. There's no statute of limitations. The only way this gets fixed, if the people, if the culture, the custom, the practice, and the policy, and the pattern is that the people who commit the wrong are promoted, the people who are potential whistleblowers inside these agencies are demoted and then forced out, this will never change.
Okay, we have a number of great questions from the audience, and what I'd like to do is get through these as quickly as possible so we can answer most of them. So if you can just keep your responses very short. Do you have a sense of what group of police officers are more likely to use deadly force, i.e. college-educated police versus non-college-educated police? Do you see a difference there?
Right, I mean, in law enforcement, there's no standard that says that you have to walk into the profession with a bachelor degree, an associate degree. You know, if you're working at Kroger's or whatever the supermarket is, making $10 an hour one day, and then 6 months later you're making $40,000 a year with, you know, you got 45, 46 bullets on you, some handcuffs, and some other tools, we have to wonder why it is that we have people who may not be the best candidate for the job making some of these egregious areas. That's one thing. 2006, the FBI came out with a study that said, oh my God, law enforcement is infiltrated by the KKK. Surprise. Well, what are you going to do about it? Who's been arrested? I mean, I've seen articles where in Georgia or South Carolina, someone was, you know, showing up at a cross burning and then identified because they put it on Facebook, and then they said, okay, you can't be a cop any longer. In those same states, how many police protect the speech of KKK members at a Capitol building? We have fundamentally some changes we have to make within law enforcement, and a lot of it goes back to our history.
Okay. The police union would say that there are many examples of suspects ambushing or killing police, and we don't talk about them. How would you respond to that, and does that justify a greater danger to officers?
I remember 2 o'clock in the morning one day. I mean, my son was 16 at the time. I came across a group of individuals at 2 a.m. One of the kids was 16, separated from that group, had his hands inside his hood jacket front pocket. I had to pull out my gun, and I said, hey, you know what? I believe you have a gun in there. Put it down. We kept on walking. I was separated from the other officers. It was just he and I. Shrubs separated us. I convinced him to put the gun down. Didn't want on my conscience shooting a 16-year-old kid at 2 o'clock in the morning to have someone go notify his parents. Did I take risk? Sure. But guess what? I can go outside this building and get hit by a car and take great risk crossing the street. If you are looking at the job of police officer, and this is from a guy that has had to disarm people who committed the act of murder, and then I had to disarm them of their gun after they committed that act. I've taken 70 guns off of people, so I'm not talking from a desk duty job. I'm talking from experience. The issue is the law is saying one thing. The policies must be tightened up to make sure that officers who may have legally the right to do something, that doesn't necessarily mean going out and executing people is the best choice, even if it's lawful.
Okay. Could raising standards for the use of force make it more likely that the city would lose lawsuits? And that's something that the Police Officers Union has suggested. If we have a higher standard for the use of force, minimal force, then there'll be more lawsuits.
No, in order to correct this problem, you have to cultivate whistleblowers within police agencies. Legislatively, you've got to give the people who are inside the agencies, you've got to give them the right, First Amendment right, where if they come forward with information about egregious behavior that's happening within inside those ranks and files, that they don't become former law enforcement officers.
When officers misuse firearm or use of force, isn't the problem really a lack of disciplinary accountability? And if you don't have consequences, that you're not going to have a change in behavior?
The policy says that an officer who accidentally discharges his weapon, shoots a person, may have still done so lawfully. So the issue, again, if we're talking about excessive force, if we're talking about a lie, an exaggeration, an omission in a report, those things are the facts. If we reviewed the police reports from the Mario Woods incident, if there's something in that report that does not align with the video, that would be an area of questioning that we would have to say, okay, why is it that your report reflects one thing, but the video says something else? If in some of these other instances of other people having been shot and killed, such as the woman who's in a stolen car, alleged stolen car, shot and killed by an officer on a street when the car was stuck. If you're standing at the driver's side door, does that mean that because the car is stuck going back and forth, you're okay with just shooting the person dead? Some people would say yes. And that's the reason why, if the policy is not explicitly clear, that is the escape clause to get out of being held accountable. Who's responsible for the policy? The chief. Who's responsible for hiring the chief? The mayor. If the policy in San Francisco, and I went around and I spoke with people yesterday, you guys have a homeless issue. You've had one for over a decade, if you weren't aware of it. All right. Here goes the problem. Here goes the problem. If the homeless are treated as third-class citizens, just because they are homeless, just because they might be someone who lost a job recently or a long time ago, just because they might be an alcoholic, just because they're drug addicted, does that mean I have the right as a police officer within 15 seconds to say your life doesn't matter, bang, bang, you're dead?
What do you recommend regarding de-escalation in terms of time? Can it be mandated that police must take, say, 15 minutes to assess and talk down a person before using force if the person doesn't have a gun?
No, you can't have that type of restriction because we as human beings are very much unpredictable. We could have someone run up in here and do something crazy. We're not going to wait 15 minutes before we react. You know what I mean? So we don't want to have limitations like that. But what we do want to go and make sure that we practice is that every life is important. We don't have on YouTube day in and day out of white people being shot and killed just like black and brown people. If we did, we'd have this whole hall filled up with more people because they would see unequal justice. They would see that this injustice needs to be corrected. The fact that you have more black and brown people up in arms about it is because majority of them see the injustice. And again, it's historical. It goes back to the very beginning. We got to go back to the 15th and 16th century to understand that, which is lost in schools because most people don't understand the history.
I have a specific question about the Luis Gongora case. I understand his family is here. The question is, the officer used a beanbag weapon and immediately starts shooting using the gun. By all accounts, Luis was on the ground sitting. was this appropriate use of the beanbag weapon? In other words, he was sitting when the beanbag weapon was used. He was shot twice. It's alleged that he stood up, and then at that point, he's shot within seconds.
And that's the issue with why every law enforcement officer should be held accountable for having a camera on them to record every encounter, because we would then have to start speculating because there's no video. There's nothing that captured those moments when they used their discretion to escalate to use of deadly force. And because that's discretionary and because we're speculating, legally, that may hold no merit in law, in the courtroom, or even administratively.
Okay. What do you suggest in terms of what could be revised or reformed about use of force in San Francisco? You talked about body cameras, you talked about leadership, just de-escalation. Anything else?
That's an excellent question. I'm a whistleblower police officer. There was a gentleman that was, thank you. There was a gentleman that was wrongfully arrested, called African Jungle Bunny, and all other derogatory words by police officers. I wasn't present for his arrest. He came up to me hours after the fact, after he was released from court, and explained his story to me. It didn't sit well with me that I was working with people who would do something like that, so I did something to help him, and he filed his complaint. It ended my career, but it didn't stop my passion for trying to correct the wrong. So this is what I did, because it's all about the solution. I filed what's called a False Claim Act Title VI claim against my police department, and it attacks, under the federal law, there is a anti-discrimination piece that when law enforcement officers receive federal grant money, they have to comply with federal law, federal anti-discrimination law, that they're not going to intentionally discriminate. In order to hold police accountable, the False Claim Act could hold them responsible for paying back triple damages. It could become a national issue if other whistleblowers from other jurisdictions join in my lawsuit. Since 1995, police agencies have received $15 billion in federal grants. We can go out into the streets and have an awareness campaign saying that we want this to stop. If we need to have it stop, I believe my lawsuit is a very novel approach to holding them accountable, because then it would force them, if they have to lose money, to realize that taxpayers fund the operation.
The San Francisco Police Department has suffered two separate scandals involving racist texts, officers exchanging racist texts. How do we change the culture of the department, and what obligation do officers have to come forward when they become aware of this kind of misconduct? And we've also talked about implied bias training. How effective is that?
Great question. Second part of the solution has to be, just like, if Jeff were a surgeon and I broke my ankle, and Jeff is going to repair my ankle as my surgeon, I want him to be competent. If he's incompetent and my ankle doesn't repair properly, I'm going to have to sue Jeff because I have damages. Police officers have indemnification. As long as they're acting within the scope of what their policies say, the court is going to say, by judge, well, person shouldn't be held accountable individually. In order to correct some of this, nationally, maybe having police officers buy their own professional insurance, having a third-party carrier assess whether or not they are at risk based on the number of claims that they are now having submitted to them, would force every officer to have to rethink if he's going to cover up for his other officer. At the same time, kind of like us with our own private car insurance. If we want to go out there and have 5 accidents today, we're going to get it canceled. Or we're going to have to pay some exorbitant rate. At some point in time, the law should say, and the administrative policy should be, if you're not insurable, you don't get a gun and you can't do this job.
And what about the implied bias training? I know there's all different types. There's an emphasis now that bias training is going to correct these problems. What do you think about that?
I look at it like this. If you're a little racist or, plenty racist, what's the difference? In those pictures of people seeing other people lynched, were they a little racist or medium racist or a lot racist? Did it really matter to the person who was lynched? So explicit, implicit bias, what does it really matter? To me, it seems to be that you're just unfit. If you are elevated to a position of law enforcement, you're held to a higher standard. If you want to be a little implicit or a lot explicit in your bias, don't be a cop.
All right, here's a very different question. I have a 20-year-old son, and we live in a low-income, high-crime neighborhood in San Francisco. What would you advise me and other parents to counsel the youth and young adults when they have encounters with the SFPD?
Well, as long as in your jurisdiction, it's awful that we're here today, but if your jurisdiction, many jurisdictions, if you want to record your encounter, you have to notify the person. Two-party consent is usually what it's called. And you say, hey, look, I'm recording you. That puts the person on notice. That protects you from them claiming that you never gave them notice. I would say we're in a world now where everything has to be recorded, sadly, because too many times, and I believe it was the Alameda Sheriff's Department?
Yeah, Alameda.
Alameda Sheriff's Department, who did not understand that there was this high-quality definition video with audio, incredible video. I've never seen video like that before that's that FBI must have put that video up. They must have installed that camera before that went down, because that was just unbelievable. You could hear this man for the better part of 15 minutes, the first couple minutes, being brutally beaten. And then for the 13 remaining minutes or so, asking for the help of all the people that walked around him, and no one helped him. All of those people should be fired. So to come back to square one to the question, would there be anyone held accountable if that video and that camera and that audio device weren't there? It'd just be another day in Oz.
Okay. We just have time for one more question, and then we're going to break for lunch. Do you have thoughts? You've looked at the Alex Nieto case. Again, you haven't been able to look at the files. The Amilcar Perez-Lopez case, Mario Woods, Luis Gongora, now Jessica Williams. What are your thoughts as to how San Francisco the police department can prevent killing people in similar situations going forward? And again, I know you've already talked about the policy, the training, the time and distance. I'm not asking you to go over those things again, but what can we do? What should we do in this situation? We have a new police chief who's just a few days on the job. He's saying, we're going to reform things, but there hasn't been any specifics discussed. We have police officers who engaged in the racist texts who were reinstated on the force without any penalty because they waited too long to prosecute them. Just last week, a week before last, we had 2 officers who got caught committing perjury in federal court, and a federal judge excoriated them, but of course there were no consequences. They were not arrested. Even in the case that you mentioned involving the Alameda sheriffs, there were charges filed only against 2 deputies after about 6 months. So, given all of what is happening here, as an outsider and as an expert who looks at use of force, what can we do to prevent these kinds of abuses and killings going forward?
Police have to be treated the same as any other criminal if they commit a criminal act. There's no such thing as a former law enforcement officer having the ability, under the powers of and color of law, committing the same act if they're no longer a police officer. They have to be fired, terminated, and if necessary, prosecuted.
All right, we're going to now break for lunch. I want to thank Ken Williams for coming here from Boston. We have lunch for everyone outside in the Latino Hispanic rooms, and we will be back at 1 p.m. We have a great performance by the Young Kings, a group of youth, both in juvenile hall and outside of juvenile hall, that are going to be performing. And we have our taser discussion and taser panel. So we'll see you here at 1 p.m. Thank you.